Some letters do not arrive with footsteps. They do not knock at the door or call out your name. They appear quietly in moments when the world becomes still enough for you to hear your own thoughts. Imagine for a moment that one such letter has found its way to you tonight. It is not written by a stranger. It is not written by someone far away. It is written by you. Not the you who sits here now, carrying questions and memories, but the you who has already walked a little farther down the road, the you who has seen what becomes of the things that trouble your heart today. The letter begins simply, not with urgency, not with warning, but with understanding. It says that once, long ago, you believed every voice around you needed an answer. Every doubt needed a defense. Every misunderstanding needed to be corrected, and perhaps you remember those moments. Moments when silence felt uncomfortable, almost heavy. Moments when someone's words stayed in your mind long after they were spoken. Why did they say that? Why did they think that about you? Why didn't they understand? Questions like these can echo inside the heart for a very long time, sometimes louder than the voices that caused them. The letter says it remembers those nights, the quiet ones, when you sat alone with thoughts that refused to settle, when a single moment kept replaying itself again and again as if your mind was searching for the perfect reply that had come too late. Maybe you remember the feeling, that quiet urge to explain yourself, to prove something, to make them see the truth the way you see it. Because deep down, being misunderstood can feel like a small wound no one else notices. And strange as it may seem, the letter does not blame you for feeling this way. It speaks gently about the heart you carried then, a heart that cared deeply about fairness, a heart that believed clarity could fix confusion. But the letter also holds a quiet secret. It says that the noise of those moments, the words, the reactions, the need to answer everything, once felt very important, almost necessary. Yet time has a quiet way of revealing which things truly mattered and which things only seemed loud for a while. The future self writing this letter remembers something you may not yet see. Many of the storms that once filled your mind slowly faded on their own. The voices that once demanded answers grew distant. The judgments that once felt heavy became strangely small. And one day, something surprising happened. You began to notice the silence, not the uncomfortable silence you once feared, but a different kind, a calm silence, a steady one, the kind that does not rush to speak. The letter pauses here, as if remembering something carefully. It tells you that in those earlier days, you believed strength meant standing in every moment, ready with the right words, ready to respond, ready to correct, ready to prove. But strength, it turns out, often looks quieter than that. Much quieter. Sometimes it sits still while the world speaks. Sometimes it listens without interruption. Sometimes it lets the noise pass, the way the wind passes through empty fields. And as the letter continues, there is a gentle feeling between the lines. Not regret, not sadness, just a quiet, understanding, because the person writing to you now has already learned something that once felt impossible to believe. Not every voice needs an answer. Not every misunderstanding needs a battle. And not every storm deserves your thunder. The letter rests there for a moment, as if waiting for you to sit with that thought. Because once you did not know this, but someday you will. There were times when the world around you did not remain quiet. There were moments when voices appeared suddenly sharp, certain, and demanding. They spoke as if they already knew the truth, as if they had already decided who you were, what you meant, what you intended. And once their words were spoken, they seemed to wait, almost expecting something from you. An answer, a defense, a reaction. You could feel it in the air. That silent pressure, the feeling that if you did not speak, something would remain unfinished. Perhaps you remember how strange those moments felt. Your heart would begin to move a little faster. Your thoughts would rush forward, gathering words, preparing explanations. It felt important to correct what had been said, to place the truth back where it belonged, because how could silence possibly carry the truth? How could quietness defend what had been misunderstood? And so many times you stepped into the storm, not because you loved conflict, not because you wished for noise, but because something inside you believed fairness required a voice. You spoke carefully. You explained your reasons. You tried to untangle the confusion that had been created in only a few careless words. But something unusual often happened. The more you explained, the more the storm seemed to grow. They did not always listen with open hearts. Sometimes they listened only long enough to answer again. Sometimes their words returned sharper than before, as if your explanation had only given the storm new wind. And afterward, when everything finally grew quiet again, you were left with a strange feeling, a heaviness that stayed behind. Not the heaviness of anger, but the tiredness that comes when the heart has tried too hard to be understood. You may have wondered about it then. Why did the words not settle the moment the way you hoped they would? Why? Did the truth sometimes seem invisible, even when spoken clearly? It could feel confusing, because in your heart, the intention was simple. You only wished to protect what was honest, to guard what was fair, to keep your dignity standing in the open light. Yet they did not always see it that way. Sometimes they watched your silence closely, as if it were a weakness waiting to be exposed. Sometimes they spoke louder, expecting the noise to pull you in. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, a quiet pattern began to appear. They would say something. Then they would wait. Almost as if your reaction was part of the moment they were hoping for. Have you ever noticed this strange thing about storms? A storm grows stronger when it meets resistance. Wind pushes against wind. Waves crash against rock. Noise answers noise. But when there is nothing to fight, something curious begins to happen. The storm circles for a while. It moves through the empty air, and eventually it passes. Back then, you did not fully see this yet. Back then, silence still felt unfinished. like a sentence that had not reached its end. But the letter remembers those moments clearly. It remembers how you sometimes walked away afterward, still holding the words inside you. Words that felt correct, words that felt necessary, yet somehow did not change what had already been decided in their minds. And on certain quiet nights, a small question began to appear, very gently, almost like a whisper. Was every misunderstanding truly meant to be solved, or were some of them simply reflections, passing shadows that revealed more about the one who spoke them than the one who heard them? At first, that thought felt unfamiliar, because the heart naturally wishes to clear its name. It wishes to stand where it can be seen correctly. But slowly, a deeper realization began to grow. Not every voice seeks understanding. Some voices seek reaction, and when reaction arrives, the storm receives exactly what it was waiting for. This was not something you understood all at once. It arrived slowly, like the quiet dimming of a fire that once burned brightly. And somewhere inside those many moments, when words collided and silence felt uncomfortable, the future self writing this letter began to notice something very important. The storm did not always begin with them. Sometimes it only continued because you stepped inside it. For a long time, silence felt unfamiliar to you. Not the quiet of the night or the peaceful stillness of an empty place, but the silence that appears in the middle of a moment when someone expects a response. That silence once felt almost uncomfortable. When words were thrown toward you, something inside would quickly rise. A thought, a feeling, a need to respond before the moment passed. As if silence might be mistaken for weakness or agreement or surrender. But time has a quiet way of teaching lessons that words cannot explain. Slowly, without any clear beginning, you started to notice something different. Not outside you, but within you. There were moments when the same voices appeared again. The same tones, the same quiet invitation to step into another storm. And yet, something inside you hesitated, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of observation. You began to watch the moment instead of rushing to answer it. And in that small pause, something surprising appeared. The urge to respond was not always coming from strength. Sometimes it was coming from discomfort, from the restless feeling that silence might leave something unsettled. But what if unsettled things were not always yours to settle? This question did not arrive loudly. It did not argue with your old habits. It simply waited in the background of your thoughts. Then, one day, in a moment very much like the ones before, the storm arrived again. Words were spoken with certainty. Judgments were placed in the air. The familiar pause followed, that silent space where they waited for your voice to enter the moment. And for the first time, something inside you remained still. You listened. You noticed the rhythm of the moment, the expectation, the quiet tension that believed your reaction was inevitable. But the reaction did not come. Not because you had no words. The words were still there, just as clear as before. Explanations still lived in your mind, ready to defend. ready to correct, yet something deeper held them gently in place. You allowed the moment to exist without filling it, and something unusual happened. The storm moved, but it did not grow. Without resistance, the noise seemed to lose its direction. The moment that once felt so urgent suddenly felt smaller, almost as if it had been waiting for energy that never arrived. You may have felt something strange in your chest then. Not anger, not pride, something quieter. A small sense of space, as if the moment had passed beside you, rather than through you. And afterward, when the silence returned, it felt different from before. It did not feel heavy. It did not feel unfinished. Instead, it carried a quiet steadiness. In that silence, you began to understand something the letter now speaks of with gentle certainty. Silence is not the absence of strength. Sometimes it is the place where strength quietly lives. There is a kind of power that shouts, that rushes forward, that insists on being heard. But there is another kind that stands still. A power that does not chase every misunderstanding. A power that does not bend itself into endless explanations. It simply knows what it is and allows the noise to pass. You started to see that silence can protect something delicate within you, your peace, your dignity, your sense of self that does not need to be proven again and again. They may have continued speaking at times. They may have still expected the old pattern to return, but something inside you had already shifted. You no longer felt pulled into every storm that appeared, and the quiet realization that followed was simple, yet deeply freeing. Not every word deserves your voice. Not every challenge deserves your energy. Sometimes the most powerful answer is the one that is never spoken, not out of bitterness, not out of distance, but out of a quiet respect for the calm you have begun to protect inside your own heart. And once that understanding begins to settle, something else begins to grow quietly beside it. A strength that does not need to announce itself. A strength that rests comfortably in silence. In the letter from the future, there is a quiet part near the end. The words slow down there, as if the writer is looking back across many years, remembering something simple that once felt very difficult to understand. It speaks about peace, not the kind that appears suddenly, like a bright light after darkness. Not the kind that arrives because the world has finally become fair or gentle. No, the peace it describes is quieter than that. It is the kind that slowly grows inside a person who has learned when to remain still. You see, the storms did not completely disappear. Voices did not suddenly become softer. The world around you did not change its nature overnight. They still spoke at times. They still formed their own conclusions. They still misunderstood things they had never truly tried to understand. But something inside you had already shifted. The place where those storms once landed had become calmer. Where there had once been urgency, there was now space. Where there had once been a restless need to answer, there was now a quiet patience. And little by little, you began to notice something unexpected. When you stopped chasing every misunderstanding, life became lighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because your energy was no longer scattered across every passing moment. The letter says that the greatest change was not outside you. It was within. There came a day when someone spoke carelessly again. Words were placed in the air that once would have stirred your thoughts for hours. Yet this time, something remarkable happened. The words reached you, but they did not stay. They passed through your awareness the way a breeze passes through open space. You heard them. You understood them. And then you let them go. No reply formed inside you. No argument gathered strength. No silent battle followed you into the night. The moment simply moved on. At first, it felt unfamiliar, almost as if you had forgotten to do something important. But slowly you realized something gentle and freeing. You had not forgotten anything. You had simply stopped carrying what was never yours to hold. The letter pauses there, as if letting that thought settle quietly. Because once you discover this, something very peaceful begins to unfold. Your mind becomes quieter. The long conversations that once continued inside your thoughts begin to fade. The need to replay moments, to rewrite answers, to imagine what you should have said, slowly loosens its grip. And in the space that remains, something calm begins to grow. You start to see people more clearly, not with resentment, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. Some speak from confusion. Some speak from their own storms. Some speak simply because they have never learned the comfort of silence. And strangely, once you see this, their words begin to, feel lighter. Not meaningless, but no longer heavy enough to disturb your peace. The letter from your future self holds a gentle truth. The life you are living now, the calm you sometimes feel, was built in small, quiet moments. Moments when you chose not to argue. Moments when you allowed silence to stand beside you. Moments when you protected your dignity without explaining it. No one applauded those moments. No one marked them as victories. Yet they quietly shaped the person you became, a person who understands that not every battle must be fought to be won. A person who knows that peace is not something the world gives freely. It is something a person protects again and again with patience and quiet strength. And so the letter ends the same way it began. Not with instructions, not with grand promises, just a calm reminder, written in gentle words. One day, the storms that once seemed so loud will become distant echoes in your memory. And when you look back, you will see that your strength did not grow in the moments when you proved yourself to others. It grew in the quiet moments when you chose to remain at peace with yourself. That is where the deepest power was always waiting, in silence.